Welcome to the podcast, everybody. This is Adam Old Man Winters, and I'm Joe Gould. We're talking about King Kong Escapes today.
Yeah, what a film. You know, last time we had our crossover, our officially licensed crossover between Godzilla and King Kong, and now we get a movie from Toho and Rankin Bass, shaking hands together, licensing from RKO, and it's a crossover with Doctor Who.
Yeah, it was quite the film. And it's a good movie, I think. But it's an odd movie.
That it is. It's hard to say if there's anything quite like the phenomena of how King Kong Escapes came to be.
Yeah, you want to walk us through a little bit of that?
Now, you talked about in our last podcast how Toho wanted to do a sequel to King Kong vs. Godzilla. And it would have had both of them in it, but it would have turned out that Godzilla died at the end of the last film, and they had to bring him back as, how were they going to bring him back?
I don't think it said how they were going to bring him back, other than they going to take his body and do something with it. I don't know if it actually specified how.
So, I guess we could look at this from two directions. One of those choose your own adventure again. We got Toho Studio, which decides, we got the license to King Kong, we want to make another movie. What are we going to do with him? And then we have, on the American side of the ocean, the Rankin Bass, fairly newly formed company that specializes in animation and stop-motion animation. So this seems like a very unusual thing where Rankin Bass has an idea to do something and Toho has an idea to do something, and Rankin Bass gets a license from RKO to make their own King Kong animated television show. Don't know if it was Saturday morning or I think it was a once-a-week thing. And that starts airing in 1966, and it's animated primarily by then the fairly young Japanese animation studio Toei, which has gone on to achieve great success with several properties, both their own and outsourcing for United States productions. I think they're probably most famous for Dragon Ball and that whole phenomenon. But Rankin Bass has already made a deal with Toei to animate their stuff for a King Kong TV show inspired by the movie, and Toho has a license to do a movie, and the unlikely thing brings them both together. What should we talk more about, the Toho side or the Rankin Bass side?
Yeah, it's an odd thing, and I think you have a much better grasp of this. But so it's based off the King Kong show. Is that right?
That's the name of it, The King Kong Show. Are we going to sing the theme song at any point during this broadcast?
I have not watched it.
What? Oh.
I have not watched it. So if you want to sing it, though, you can feel free.
Well, I don't know if I want to do that, but you know the name King Kong. And you know the fame of King Kong. And he got his own cartoon show. And Captain Englehorn came along for the ride. And I guess it's 26 episodes total. I have not been able to find them all. I think only the first 10 episodes plus the two-part pilot were put out on DVD a long time ago. Back in the days when companies would put 4 episodes on a disc and tell us we were lucky to have them. And I don't know if we were or not, but I have one of those discs. And there's a slew of incomplete recordings of various quality on YouTube, or Internet Archive, but not the whole thing. I kind of like this show, though. I didn't expect to like it at all, but it's at the same time it's really stupid, but it's not quite as juvenile as I thought it would be. You can tell that it plays everything straight, sort of like a spy movie would try to. But the difficulty is, even though there's 26 episodes, aside from the pilot, every episode is broken up into 3 segments. So the first segment, you get a 6 or 7 minute King Kong episode. Very short. And in the final third segment, you get another unrelated King Kong episode of the same lengths. And right in between them, you get this TV show that Rankin Bass was probably having trouble selling on its own. It's called Tom of Some, which is about a secret agent man who was shrunk down to thimble size, and he goes on his very wacky adventures. And I don't hate it. I won't say I'm terribly interested in it, but everything I've watched about that has amused me. So, there's the King Kong show. Apparently it ran on TV for 3 or 4 years, which is bizarre to me for a 1-season, 26-episode order. Well, there you go.
So this TV series is supposed to be, this film is supposed to be loosely based off the TV series. But my understanding is that in the TV series, there is no Doctor Who, there is no Madame Piranha, and like, what is exactly the connection? Like, how is it? Where's the loosely coming from?
Well, I'm going to jump in. There is definitely a Doctor Who, WHO, but Doctor Who is a lot shorter in the TV show, and he shows up in episode 2 officially as just a guy who... So I should mention Mondo Island. Did you catch that? In the movie, that's where King Kong lives, and in the TV show, That's where King Kong lives. And funny enough, in the TV show, when they first show Mondo Island, it has a giant skull cut out on the side of a volcano. But it's not Skull Island, it's Mondo Island. And I don't know if there's many natives or villagers on Mondo Island. I probably didn't see enough episodes. But after, you'll love this, it's the Bond family, the Bond. So Professor Bond, he's a scientist, and he's a single dad, and he has his 2 kids, a girl named Susan, and a boy named Bobby or Billy or something. Supposedly he inspired somebody in the Gamera series of, and they all visit the island. They rode on a boat with Captain Englehorn, and Englehorn left them on the island, but he warned them about the legend of Kong, and they didn't believe it. And little Bobby goes off into the jungle, and he gets attacked by a Tyrannosaurus or an Allosaurus or whatever. And just like in the movie, King Kong shows up and grabs little Bobby and puts him in the tree. I gotta figure that kid's name out right eventually. Yeah, Bobby. He puts him in the tree and he fights the Allosaurus. And Bobby makes friends immediately with King Kong, and then he takes him back to his dad and Captain Englehorn. And they all make nice, and so the Bond family is going to live on Mondo Island and hang out with Kong, but periodically they go on different adventures around the world. The pilot episode even started with Captain Englehorn putting Kong on a raft and taking him back to New York City. Well, that wasn't where they intended to go, but a storm came up in the middle of the ocean, and Captain Englehorn told little Bobby, for the good of the ship, he had to take an axe and cut Kong's raft loose. And they wave goodbye to each other as the storm envelops him. But King Kong found his way to New York shores. Somehow he swam all the way from the middle of the ocean to New York City, and he climbed the Empire State Building. Just why not? And so I guess Doctor Who, so Doctor Who shows up in episode 2 after King Kong has been made a little bit more public. They're back on Mondo Island, and he says he wants to study King Kong, and he wants to take him somewhere to do that. And Professor Bond brings Bobby in, and he says, "Bobby, what do you think?" Bobby says, "No, sir. You're not taking Kong off this island." Doctor Who pulls out a gun on him. He's a little short guy. He's bald. He's real ugly. What's that guy from the Hulk who has the giant skull? What's his name? The
leader.
He looks like the leader, this Doctor Who fella. And he does capture King Kong, and he even tries to take him away with several of those helicopters like you see in this movie. and a giant net. He dropped a big sleeping bomb on Kong, and he hauls him away. In these, it becomes a tradition now. If you want to transport Kong, you got to do it with a giant net and helicopters, because the previous movie used balloons and giant or special wires. But and there is, well, I don't know about Madam whatever her name is, Piranha. She was called Madam X in the version I watched. But she's not in the show so far as I can tell. But Mechani-kong is in the show, believe it or not. Not one, but two Mechani-kongs. And in the first appearance, which I think is episode 10, which I had to track down on YouTube, Mechani-kong is piloted by Doctor Who, who's in the head compartment somehow. And they fight King Kong. And I didn't see the other episode. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Wait, you said these are 6-minute episodes?
6-minute
you said there's 24 episodes in the series. Is that 24 6 minutes, or is that 24 two sets of 6 minutes?
The segments are about 6 minutes long, so the episodes are about 25 to 30 minutes long. So you get 2 King Kong segments in every episode, so far as I can tell.
Okay,
and then you get
so the whole series would have about 48 segments, so to speak.
That's about right. Yeah, assuming they kept consistent with that.
So would you say that the series is enough source material that you would, like, if Marvel, they use the comics when they're as the source material for the movies, and they just change stuff as they want. So you would say it is accurate to say the TV series is source material.
That's fair. And from what I read online, Rankin Bass even pushed back against Toho on their original movie pitch to make it more like the TV show.
Okay.
Because
so I just want to take a break here and tell the audience. So just in case we have a weird dynamic, I'm having, in my ear, Adam is especially quiet today. So I may have to ask him to repeat a few things, because if I'm talking over him, I'm not hearing him as well as I normally do. So that's interesting. So they were pushing back because they wanted it to be more like it, or they said it was too much?
Rankin Bass wanted it more like the TV show. Toho wanted to make a movie called, let me see if I wrote this down right, Operation Robinson Crusoe, King Kong versus Ibira.
Okay, so that's the one that later became the Godzilla versus the Sea Monster.
That's right. And it's a pretty weird take on Godzilla, and that's likely because it was written for King Kong, and it came out in Japan the same year that the King Kong TV show debuted in America, 1966.
Okay, so that's interesting. I knew that obviously that the King Kong the Godzilla Sea Monster movie was originally going to be a Kong movie, but I did not realize that it got developed or the idea was out this this far ahead of time. I thought this was I thought Toho was behind the story 100%, and then planned on that movie. That's interesting that it overlapped.
So it's interesting that Ishiro Honda is brought on to direct this, and he probably uses the most diverse cast as far as American Anglo actors and Japanese actors in this movie, and who knows what else.
As we piggyback off that, I wanted to talk about the dubbing history of this movie too. So this is an interesting thing. So the English dubbing took place at Rankin Bass, so they were very much involved. For the English, so let me back up too. There's really only one version of this movie available for American audiences. We've never received a Japanese version with English subtitles. So you have the Japanese version with Japanese version, you have English version, and there's been no update to that. So we're all watching the same thing today, which just kind of makes it simpler in a lot of ways. So in the Japanese version, the American actors spoke English and were dubbed over in Japanese. And then for the English dubbing, for most of the actors, veteran voice actor Paul Frees dubbed all the male voices, with the exception of Commander Nelson, who came and dubbed himself.
Because...
So my understanding is, I don't know if he actually dubbed over the Japanese, I don't know if he had to redo it or not. That would be interesting to know. because he spoke English on the Japanese version. They dubbed over in Japanese. So I don't know if he had to record his lines again or what.
It looks
But
like a re-recording to me, not perfectly matched.
yeah, it's a really odd thing to watch because you're seeing these English people speak English, and it's mostly on point. But it's an odd thing. And then for the female voices, Julie Bennett did them all, which there's fewer of those, including Linda Jo Miller, Susan. But Miller hated her dubbed voice in the American version, but liked the sound of the Japanese dubbing. And she was pretty mad at Rankin, the producer. But I guess the reason why she couldn't go and do it is because she was only a model and was residing in Japan at the time. Whereas, what was the guy's name? Rhodes Reeson, the Commander Nelson, he was actually part of the Screen Actors Guild. So there was reasons for it. But it just makes a really odd dynamic where you have, Japanese dubbing for the American characters, and then even in America you have it's not their, even though there's a lot of English that they're speaking, it's not their actual voice, it's another character or another person behind the scenes.
They made a decision to go with the suit filming again instead of stop motion, even though Rankin Bass seems like they would be picking up the torch from the RKO tradition of stop motion. But interesting on that.
Yeah, they did some models too. It makes you wonder if I don't know how much Rankin Bass was involved in the actual production though. This feels very Toho movie,
Yeah. If I said Son of Kong reminds me of the Bomble from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, this redesigned King Kong suit reminds me even more of the Bomble.
Oh yeah, especially when he first wakes up in that cave.
Yeah, it's cool because there's a man in the suit sometime. I mean, we finally got a man in a suit that looks like a Rankin Bass stop motion. And I like the suit. It's a lot different than the previous one, even though I think the zipper is kind of visible in the back when you get a shot of his back, especially when he's in the water. Yeah.
Yeah, the special effects in this movie were kind of hit and miss. Some of them were pretty well done, and then some of them, not so much. I thought Mechani-kong looked really good. I'm assuming it was some kind of vinyl material. I'm not even sure, but it definitely looks like a metal, like a stiff metal kind of stuff. And then Kong, I don't know what to think of the Kong suit. It's I'm kind of torn.
Well, he does not look like a man in a suit.
He shows emotion, but not necessarily in all the right ways.
Yeah, he looks like a cartoon character on film.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem I have with the suit is they make his face very emotional. And he's very flamboyant with his arms, but I don't think his eyes have the ability to actually open 100%. He's always got that eyelid, the top 20% of his eye.
Uh-huh.
So he always looks like he's just had a few drinks.
Well, that red berry juice.
There was no red berry juice in this one.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah.
So this movie is not, in terms of the information for this movie, it's just harder to find. So I did figure out that it cost, let's see here, about 170 million yen to produce, which I did some math on that, and I believe that is the equivalent of about $467,000 today. And that's based off U.S. versus yen in 1968. So that's not with today's money. It's back then. Mm-hmm. And then I know in the U.S. and Canada, it made about $3 million. But I have no idea what it got in Japan.
Yeah, if I remember from my Wikipedia reading, when King Kong marathons became a thing in the northeastern United States in the late 1970s, this movie was sometimes included in those marathons.
I remember you telling me that, yeah. And then one other little note is the American version is about 8 minutes shorter than the Japanese version, but I couldn't find any details as to what the differences were. From a pacing perspective, unless they took out some really fun stuff, it's probably a win that they cut the 8 minutes, because there were some times even in the American version where it's dragging a little bit.
I hope it's not sequences of Linda Jo Miller's skirt sliding down or something, which people point out online at various points in this movie.
So what do you think of the plot, Adam?
It's very Saturday morning-esque, and I guess we open Do we open with Doctor Who, or do we open with the submarine, the United Nations submarine? I forget what starts
So
first.
we open with the submarine, but it's a pretty quick scene. I think it's only a couple minutes, and basically they introduce the nurse, to quote the Animaniacs, like "Hello, nurse," whatever it was. So she
Hello,
walks in.
nurse. Let's see. She had
There
a
you go.
name.
So she walks
What?
into the room,
Man.
and you got the two minions on the boat who basically, with a nurse like that, we need to get sick. And I think she basically threatens them with castor oil. It's like, I'll give you the runs, buddy. Leave me alone. And then she walks into the other room with the other two main characters from the UN side, and they basically show her Kong research, and they all are lamenting the fact that they actually have a job to do and can't just go to Mondo Island. And then they go to Doctor Who.
Okay, so I had forgotten about how this played out. Is it established that the commander and the lieutenant commander on the submarine, I guess we'll call it Nelson and Nomura, they know King Kong exists on the island already? Is that established?
Well, they have studied. I don't know what they studied, but they studied the rumors and the innuendo that this Kong monkey gorilla thing existed. I don't know where that research comes from. It's pretty clear that even though this is, I guess, technically the fourth King Kong film, if you count the two Americans and Godzilla vs. Kong, I don't think they're sharing the same continuity exactly. Now, later we find out that Doctor Who stole, I don't know exactly why Nelson was trying to come up with a Mechani-kong, but he basically stole Nelson's research to form his Mechani-kong. But they never really show what they were doing for that originally.
Well, I didn't think it was clear that either Nelson or Doctor Who had ever seen King Kong to begin with.
Oh, I don't think they had.
Man.
I think they knew about the island. I think they've seen pictures of things, but
they were building Mechani-kong, which they knew exactly the height and the measurements so that they could overlay. They did that little overlay of the transparency of Mechani-kong over regular Kong. Huh.
Yeah. Well, like you said, this is very Saturday morning cartoon-esque.
Yeah. I think the cartoon did it better, though. They at least had a formal introduction to Doctor Who and Kong.
Yeah.
So, Madam X, or she confuses me too, Piranha. What's her deal?
Well, obviously she's from the unnamed country.
Asian
country. And they want the Element X to be the nuclear power of the world and take over. And she wants to kill millions of people to do so, as long as no one in Tokyo gets hurt, apparently.
But she's not representing Japan. It's just some unnamed mysterious. She's not representing Russia.
Yeah, it's not America, it's not Russia, it's not Japan. She basically, and we're jumping ahead here, but at the end of the day, she doesn't want to create an international conflict between her country and Japan. I'm not sure why they're afraid of Japan. I'm not sure Japan had done anything to be considered big bullies. They needed someone to help them escape later.
Yeah, there's a scene later in the movie where Captain Nelson is in her den. He's a prisoner on whatever Doctor Who is rolling around in. Maybe it's in the base. And she tries to use her feminine wiles on Commander Nelson. And then he tries to go all James Bond on her. He grabs her by the mouth and he says, "You're not Japanese. You're not Chinese. What are you?" Like it's some big deal. But then that doesn't go anywhere. And then she ends up betraying Doctor Who because of Tokyo.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if that's where some of the 8 minutes went, or got cut from.
Ooh, you're probably right about that.
And it would make sense. She is the least important of the main characters. So what do you think of the look of Doctor Who? We're introduced to his lair at the North Pole. He steals Kong's, or Nelson's research on Kong. And he's got a very, and for the record, Mechani-kong actually shows up only 5 minutes into this movie. So I appreciate that they didn't sit on the suit so long. But what do you think of, we'll throw both of them in there, Doctor Who's look and Mechani-kong.
Well, Doctor Who's a lot taller than the TV show, and he has a full head of hair. I was trying to liken him to a cartoon bad guy. I think he has a little bit Hanna-Barbera quality, but as I understand, he's also inspired by some James Bond villains, as well as Madame Piranha is apparently played by a lady who was in one of the James Bond films. Right?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's Mia or Mai Hama, but she was in You Live Only Twice in '67. So it must have been really. I guess that movie just came out.
Yeah, I didn't see that one, but she would have been riding high. And she follows up her James Bond role with King Kong Escapes. How about that?
Well, based on the quality of these sets, I think they probably filmed this movie in about 2 weeks.
Let's see. So,
I did like Doctor Who's cape.
Oh yeah, very Hanna-Barbera, or Funimation, Magneto, maybe, like whoever did the Fantastic Four cartoon.
Hey, did you notice his teeth?
I don't remember them. I probably paid attention, but I'm not thinking about them.
He's got the shiny white teeth on top, which I'm pretty sure are not real, because his bottom teeth look like he has been smoking cigarettes and not brushing his teeth for like the last 50 years. Like there's barely anything left of him. He's
a perfect cartoon villain then.
Yeah. Now, if you go back and watch a few clips, especially in the second half, it's very noticeable. It's very like, why would you give the guy upper teeth, fake ones, but not bottom ones? It's like
maybe they thought it would make him look more villainous if he had. Are the teeth oversized by any chance?
No, the top ones are normal. The bottom ones are just undersized because they've rotted.
Okay. Is it clear that their base is in the North Pole as opposed to the South Pole? I wasn't sure on that.
Well, they do make the reference that they hope they don't have to go to the North Pole, and then I think they're making a joke there.
They cut directly to the base, which again gives me all that Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer vibe again. But
yeah, I'm not 100% sure if they actually said North Pole, but they definitely alluded to it being there.
Let me point out something on the geography. Mondo Island is pointed out on a map to be off the coast of Australia, the mainland Australia. It's off the northeast mainland. And I thought it was funny at the end of King Kong vs. Godzilla last week that after King Kong either defeats Godzilla or fights him to a stalemate, he just starts swimming back to his island. And I did some estimations on the internet about how many miles has he got to swim. And it's over 3,000. And then you factor in nautical miles and all that. I said, there's no way that monkey's going to swim his way 3,000 miles. But this movie completely proves me wrong on that. Because this movie establishes that King Kong is a beast both in the water and on land.
Oh yeah, he could be an Olympic swimmer.
Olympic nothing. He's like a superhero. He's Aquaman or Sub-Namor or whatever you want to call him.
So real quick, I'm going to give a summary of the plot, just because I know we're not going to hit on everything. So we found out Doctor Who creates the Mechani-kong to mine a radioactive element X, and he's being funded by the spy lady. At the same time, the sub-crew finds Mondo Island when they don't find it. They know where it's at, but they go visit it when their submarine has mechanical problems, and they discover Kong, who very quickly falls in love with a girl. Shocker! and then
he's
Doctor
back to
Who,
the blonde women this time around. Anglo blonde women.
Yeah, so Doctor Who's Mechani-kong fails in mining the element X because it's a little unclear whether it's radioactivity or magnetism fries his circuits.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, he has to go kidnap the real King Kong, and then they kidnap the crew as well. It's kind of like a backup plan because Kong likes to listen to the girl.
That was so dumb. Ultimately, they went along on that, though. The crew did.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then ultimately, King Kong escapes, and Mechani-kong chases after him, and they end up in Tokyo, and they have a big fight. So ultimately, in case we don't get to everything, that's the gist of the plot. We can jump in where we want to. But.
So they battle in the North Pole, and then Kong swims away and Mechani-kong I don't think can swim. So yeah, they do transport everybody back to Tokyo, and that's where Madame Piranha changes her tune on Doctor Who's plan.
Yeah. So I think we covered a lot of the Doctor Who creating Mechani-kong and what's he doing that for. But so let's go back to when the crew is on Mondo Island and they discover Kong. What stood out to you in that scene?
Well, the Gorosaurus comes to mind.
I prefer to call it an iguanosaurus.
Okay, that's fair.
It had a very iguana look going.
And
what do you think of the iguanosaurus suit?
I've always thought he's the lamest of all the Toho monsters. Now, I think in this movie, it works fine because it's Toho getting their chance to do their take on the original King Kong film. They didn't get to do that in the last movie. It never really came up that Kong was gonna. He battled an octopus, but he battles a dinosaur here, and I think it works a lot better than I thought it would. So Gorosaurus has a very special move where he can jump up way beyond his own height and use his tail to balance himself, and then he kangaroo kicks. He gets 4 or 5 good shots in on Kong doing that.
Is there a move that makes less sense for the creature doing it, by the way?
I was browsing YouTube today, and I found that in the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers show, some of the Tyrannosaurus Robot Zord copies that move very much. So it had a cultural impact.
Growing up, we never thought about dinosaurs doing drop kicks. So the setup for that scene's amazing. So they get there on the island, and they tell the girl, hey, we're going to go look around. You stay here. It's safer. And, of course, immediately, over the shoulder, you had this... I'm still calling it the iguanosaurus. Scares her. She screams. That's what wakes up Kong, who's come from his drunken slumber. But this dinosaur, the suit has so much loose skin in the front.
He's a fatty, no doubt about it.
Well, he used to be a fatty. It looks like he got liposuction. He's got all that loose flapping skin.
Oh yeah. I'll give you that much. I'll give you that. He's got some age to him. Yeah, he got some age to him. He's needs some nip and tuck.
Yeah,
I think.
But their fight was definitely a WWF WWE match. The Dino did a jump kick. They have a headlock takeover. Punches to the face. Got kicked off. The dinosaur waves his fingers menacingly. And then King Kong goes to the ground and pound and temporarily takes him out.
Yeah, but he's a biter. Your Iguanosaurus. He will bite when he's up against it.
And every time Kong won a battle or a portion of it, he'd always do some kind of... It's like a mix between Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior's celebration. He'd flex his arms and beat his chest and then, showing off the girl. He's
impressing his lady. Miss Elizabeth's down there.
Ultimately, the dinosaur kind of wakes up and bites his foot, and he has to break its mouth. What do you think of the dish soap bubbles that came out?
I liked that. I don't think I'd seen that much in a Toho movie up to this point. It's a nice little touch.
I thought the foam looked a little too clean, though.
Well, sure, but I don't know how much practice.
A little too much like Dawn and Joy. The other thing that stood out to me is that we learned that Kong's native language is English.
He's real good at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you thinking of a specific command that he gets?
Well, every time she tells him to put her down, he does it.
That's a TV show reference, if you can believe it.
So, speak of that, Kong, that language thing comes up. Later on, you have Doctor Who telling Kong what to do via a headset.
Well, he brainwashes him first. Hypnotizes him. With a disco ball.
And I thought about this. I think what the hypnotism really did was it created the ability for Kong to translate the Japanese language that Doctor Who was speaking into English so that he would understand and obey.
That makes sense. Yeah, I don't know how Toho would have thought that through, but how many languages does Kong understand?
I think it's English. And then there was, I know I won't bring this stuff back up again. Let me see where I made the note. It was, He was all right. So at the end of the movie, Kong's at the chasing Mechani-kong at the tower, and Mechani-kong has the girl, and Doctor Who yells, I guess via the Mechani-kong, "You get yourself down here and get on our boat, please, or we're gonna drop the girl."
Yeah. Yeah.
He didn't obey that one. At the very end, the girl says, "Kong, stop that ship! Get that ship, Kong!" And he fully understands what she's saying and goes and takes care of that business.
Yeah, that was curious. That sort of thing happened more in the TV show too. You can understand that Kong would comprehend the emotional tone of a command, but the idea that you could point and tell him to go get something, it's like they've trained him how to fetch somehow. But does he sink the whole boat at the end, or what happens to Doctor Who?
Oh yeah,
does he die?
He beats the crap out of that thing, and everyone on board dies.
Oh
It's
yeah,
a giant murder scene.
They do show him getting crushed, right? Something falls on Doctor Who.
Yeah, but I mean, everyone in the boat dies. That's the insinuation.
Yeah, he didn't do much of that in the cartoon show, but it was good to see the villains meet their end finally.
What'd you think when they were when the helicopter fight, so to speak, when they were trying to get him and they were using those gas canisters? What'd you think of the little toy crane machine that they used to pick him up with?
Well, I think that's a TV show reference too, from episode 2 where Doctor Who first appears, but after the little hovercraft, I'm not sure anything else really captured my imagination at that point. The technology they have.
Did you notice on the cranes they were using to pick them up, they had strings on the different sides to lift them? Like it wasn't actually a device that opened. It was just like loose. And they had to pull up on 2 strings to get it to open on the camera.
Yeah, I didn't worry too much about that. Yeah, once you've decided you're going to transport a giant gorilla by helicopters and a net, it's weird, but it's become so familiar to me by now. Just however you can do that. It looked better than the balloons and the special wire in the last movie, so they went all the way to the North Pole with that.
So in that scene and earlier, they introduced the one islander in the movie.
Oh,
this
Robinson
little
Crusoe,
old man
poor
who
guy.
Can't be more than 3 feet tall, by the way. So he gets shot by Doctor Who, and then ultimately the crew finds him, and that's how they know that Doctor Who stole King Kong. But did you catch the quote? In this again, he's got a Japanese dialect. I don't know what the chances of that are. But did you hear his description of Doctor Who?
What did he say?
He said,
"An oriental skeleton, a devil who lies like a gutter rat, kidnapped Kong and took him to the skies.
He says it's
my old friend, International Judas, Doctor Who."
Yeah, I remember International Judas, and that suggested they had worked on the projects together. But yeah, I didn't remember all the other things the poor guy said.
What'd you think of the hypnotism of Kong?
Yeah, very Saturday morning. I like a little disco ball. It seems a bit too convenient, and I think the movie loses scale when they're trying to show the human minions of Doctor Who up on a forklift or whatever, attaching the radio device to his ears. That it seems like the scale really goes out the window around that point.
Yeah,
how big is he supposed to be?
It only took about 30 seconds to do it.
They say somewhere in the movie he's either 50 or 60 feet tall in this, which would go along with the cartoon show theme song that he's 10 times as big as a man, just in case you were wondering.
Yeah, I think it was 60 feet in that first scene when they're introducing their research to Susan. I think that's when it comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought the hypnotism device looked like a lampshade, but it was definitely they were a little ahead of their times. It was very 70s-esque.
Is that the same thing they attached to the head of Mechani-kong, or was that something else?
I don't know if it was the exact same thing, because I was trying to remember if he had that device already on his head, but it was similar, if not the same thing.
And maybe it's interchangeable with different things you can put in there.
Yeah.
The Tokyo Tower bit was fun. I don't know. I've forgotten how high Tokyo Tower is supposed to be, It may be over 1,000 feet tall, but
They should have had him run to France and just get on the actual Eiffel Tower.
okay. But then Madame Piranha wouldn't have been concerned about Paris, just Tokyo.
That is true. So I was a little confused at the end when they're fighting on the top of the tower, and she goes and she tries to unplug everything. I was trying to figure out if is she unplugging Mechani-kong, or because at the same time you had these little explosions going off, and it's like they tried to imply that these things are connected, and I don't think they were. And then the tower breaks and Mechani-kong plunges, but it was an odd scene to me.
Well, definitely an odd scene. So they use a little bit more of a puppet for the scenes where Susan is involved, and it's probably a little bit more puppety than the previous movie was when Fumiko was being held by Kong. I can't quite remember how much of that they went with.
What did you think of when Kong was in Tokyo? They acted like he's this rampaging beast, but he's just kind of strolling around like a tourist. He's not touching anything.
Yeah, you would have thought Tokyo would have seen a lot worse by then, 1967. All the monsters who supposedly had been through the city.
I mean, later it appears that Kong is bulletproof, but they hadn't really established that at this point. So I'm just thinking, like, they got all these tanks swarming around. It's like, they could take this guy out pretty quick.
I forgot he got shot. Who shoots him?
Well, when he's chasing the ship at the end, there's like 500 people on the boat shooting at him.
Oh yeah. I was wondering how he didn't die from that. Man.
Yeah. Well, I think the Toho Kong must be a little more bulletproof. But yeah, he didn't get shot at one time in the city. I think he went through a few electrical wires, which at first I thought were tanks, but I realized he just stumbled into the lights because he was blinded by their flashlights.
I thought the little miniature city looked better this time than it did in the last movie, as far as King Kong to go have fun in Tokyo.
No, I thought it looked real good. Only one building got destroyed, though.
Well,
so
keep the damage down.
I don't know, maybe they spent more money on paint. But it's a pretty colorful film, by the way. Bright colors everywhere.
It looks pretty good, yeah, better than you think it would. What I wanted to point out on that one building that was destroyed, it looks pretty good even half destroyed because you can see a little bit of the interior floors, and it doesn't look super fake. It at least looks like it has floors the way it's cut.
Yeah.
So that was okay.
No, I thought I do, and maybe it's because they knew they weren't going to be tearing everything down, but I think they definitely spent more time on that one shot, making it. Again, I'm not sure why the building didn't fall over. It definitely been damaged enough, but it looked good.
Remember, it's Rampage. You got to hit it a certain number of times in each spot for it to fall over.
Yeah. So one other Mechani-kong thing. What exactly was that supposed to be, a laser or just a bright light?
I thought it was just a blind Kong, and I thought it was somehow related to his hypnotizing ray. But once he got rid of that, he would just use it to blind him. But I've got the DVD cover here. That looks like he's trying to use it as a laser. You mean his eyeballs or the thing at the top of his head?
His eyeballs. Yeah, the thing on top is his hypnotism. You think it was just for helping him in the mine when he was digging?
Yeah, unless it is a heat ray. But it would make more sense.
He wasn't really formed to fight. He was formed to dig.
Oh, that's another thing we should point out. It was revealed very early in this morning that the real King Kong is known by his digging powers. He can dig humongous holes and tunnels. And that's a new power King Kong has now. So that's why Mechani-kong was made to imitate him.
They spent a lot of money making a Mechani-kong when they really could have just bought some bulldozers.
Boy, supervillains never think things through the most logical way. Because it wouldn't be near as much fun, and these are guys who wear capes and funky hairstyles, and never worry about brushing their teeth. You think they can be bothered to rent some bulldozers when they could just build a mechanical monkey? Of course not.
Now, Doctor Who is definitely from a Saturday morning cartoon show. So anything else stand out to you in the movie? Very plot light.
Well, sure. I wish I had a Japanese cut of this. I really do. Um, mm.
You would almost need to put. I think the most interesting thing to do would be just turn the audio off on the Japanese version because you're not going to understand anything, and put both movies playing at the same time next to each other, so you can watch the screen of the Japanese movie while listening to the English, and then you'd be able to figure out, when they edited stuff out.
Hey, let me talk about, now that we're on the torture traps inside the North Pole base. What do you think about some of those torture traps they put our heroes through? Our stupid heroes for getting on the airplane or whatever and just going right up to the North Pole for some reason. But once they get there, I thought it was a little bit James Bond, but also very Saturday morning.
Yeah, I mean, the one that stands out is the cold room where they, I guess, turned the air conditioner on and instantaneously got down to 0 degrees.
That's very impressive.
I like the drama effect of when they're about to disfigure her face and then Kong erupts or breaks out. I wish they had made some kind of way of her screaming or something, and then Kong hearing her and getting real agitated, and that's when he breaks out. But
yeah,
this seemed to be dumb luck.
That seemed like what they wanted to do, but they didn't do that.
No, I mean it would have made sense, but but the dramatic effect I still think was mostly successful there.
So there's an odd bit how all of our heroes are captive in the base, and then the Captain Nelson somehow gets free, and he goes and opens the cell and lets out Susan and Nomura, and now they're on the run, but they immediately get recaptured. And I'm just wondering, why did we go through all that if we were just going to recapture them?
Well, they got themselves out. They found him. They thought he was dead. That's what Doctor Who had said. They've been playing chess.
Oh, yeah,
but
yeah. Oh,
when Kong erupts and Doctor Who runs, they left the keys on the table.
Yeah. So Susan is no longer chained up, and she can go grab the keys and let Nomura out.
Yeah.
Then they go, and where do they find Captain Nelson at? Is he...
I think in the chess room. I'm not sure.
They do play a game of chess, don't they? Doctor Who and Nelson, they go all Picard and Magneto, Xavier and Magneto playing a game of chess.
Yeah, they're playing a game of chess, and I think some of this got edited out because they're playing a game of chess. He says, "Why are you letting your friends be tortured? Just do what I want." And then they immediately cut back to the cell, and Doctor Who comes in and threatens to disfigure her face. But they never really explain what happened with Nelson at that point. I'm guessing some lame dialogue, and they just left him in the room. But
yeah,
and then that's when the spy lady starts to have a change of heart.
I want that Japanese cut just to know what happened there.
I think it was released recently. I'm not sure what it would run you in terms of getting one imported.
Oh, Internet Archive should help me out somehow.
Not a lot going on online with it.
But eventually, all three of our heroes do get recaptured after escaping.
Yeah, they didn't actually escape. I think they were about to escape, and then Doctor Who came in the room.
So the Madame, she lets them out the second time, doesn't she? And they go to the little raft or the flotation device.
Yeah. So when they escape from their little cell, they find Nelson, and then on their way of getting out, she finds them. And it's an unsuccessful escape because Doctor Who comes back. And then later on, while they're messing with them, the Mechani-kong, she kind of sneaks off and goes to their cell and lets them loose and gets them on the boat. And I think that's when she doesn't get shot. She helps them escape I'm not sure why she's not in trouble, but she helps them get out.
There's a whole bunch of the shipmates using rifles and shooting at the heroes in the water. And nobody connects any bullets. And they're not moving terribly fast. I know it's dark, it's in the water. But this is also in the North Pole, right? Or are they... No, they're on a boat at that point,
I think they were on their way to New York. They had to be close to New York, because they would not be able to take the raft all the way to New York.
And I forget, because the movie cuts really quickly. Once they get onto their little speedboat, they somehow arrive back at the United Nations, and they're all in different clothing, maybe? They're dry. I forget.
Yeah, at some point they changed their outfits. But yeah.
King Kong swam his way down to Tokyo from the North Pole. Huh.
Yeah, it would be curious if some of the 8 minutes is like my gut says it's like 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there. But
yeah.
it probably the transition scenes just they lost it. But they're editing it like a Saturday morning cartoon, basically.
Yeah, they got commercial breaks they got to worry about. Get that in there.
Absolutely.
So
So what do you think of the
Gorosaurus
ending?
will show up in more Godzilla movies, but King Kong sadly never makes another appearance, even though I have read online Toho was hoping to bring him in for a 1990s movie, or maybe even the Mechanical Kong was going to be brought back. But they just didn't want to chance a legal battle.
Yeah, so it said they had a hard time getting permission to get King Kong, and then even to get permission to use the likeness of King Kong, Mechani-kong would have been hard. But what? I guess this would have been pre-Nintendo lawsuit.
Well, no, if we're talking about the 1990s or the 1960s, though, because
All right, so
I
yeah,
think
actually
two
answered my
different
question
things.
when you said that. So in the 90s, that would have been post Donkey Kong lawsuit. So I wonder why they didn't feel like they could use Mechani-kong or something like a Mechani-kong.
It should have been free-for-all, but I think if you're Toho, they've fought enough lawsuits over Godzilla copyright infringement, trademark infringement. Maybe they just were trying to respect another company's claim.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they already had their Mechanic Godzilla. I don't really know why they needed a Mechani-kong, but, you know.
Some of the descriptions of that movie are very interesting. They say that Mechani-kong would have been able to inject humans inside of Godzilla, but it would look like a whole interior world inside Godzilla. Not like he's just guts and organs, but it would be like a Fantastic Voyage or something like that. Nano size.
That's the weirdest thing ever.
A separate dimension inside Godzilla.
That might be a better reason why the movie didn't get made.
Oh, man.
So what do you think of the name of this movie, King Kong Escapes? Does it really fit?
He does escape, but it's not that big a deal. Are they talking about he escapes from control of Doctor Who? Is that specifically what it's in reference to?
Well, there was a line. Let me see if I can find it. I did write it down because I heard it. Yeah, so the spy lady, once he breaks the hypnotism in the cave via getting drowsy from the radiation or whatever, he tears off his earpiece, and then the spy lady shouts out, "The beast has escaped." So I'm assuming that that's the reference.
I read on Wikipedia that the German cut of this movie somehow works Frankenstein into the title of the film.
Yeah, so the English translation would be King Kong, Frankenstein's son. I don't get it.
They keep going back to that
titles.
Frankenstein connection.
Yeah. In Belgium, it was the Revenge of King Kong. In Italy, it was King Kong, the Giant of the Forest. In Turkey,
miserable.
It was Wrath of the Monsters. In Mexico, it was The Return of King Kong. Finland was King Kong on the Island of Terror.
Ugh.
And in Sweden, it was King Kong on Terror Island. So they had quite a few. Maybe they made the posters and they made a title that kind of matched the poster. Maybe that's what they were doing.
Yeah, none of those are very good, just as far as the English communication. Maybe Escapes was as good as they could have gone.
Why don't you think they just called it? Why wouldn't they just call it King Kong versus Mechani-kong?
Makes sense to me. Or, I guess Doctor Who would be its own problem. But,
or Susan, King Kong's girlfriend.
Oh, man. That might be a different kind of movie.
So I would have enjoyed going to see this movie in the theaters because in the U.S. it came out and it was a double feature with Don Knotts and The Shakiest Gun in the West. I would have enjoyed that.
That sounds like a great matinee. That really does. I like it. So just to recap, you had a movie franchise, King Kong, which got adapted into a Saturday morning television show. And then you have a Japanese company making a movie about inspired by the television show, inspired by the movies. To which Toho also takes inspiration from the original movies. That has to be a pretty rare thing. Movie, television show to movie.
Yeah. I'd have to think. I mean, there may be some other examples, but you also, especially when you throw out, you have the multiple countries involved too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, what a weird world we
Well,
live
Adam, you got
in.
any other thoughts on this movie?
It just seems like Godzilla, King Kong, and Frankenstein are responsible for everything good and bad in our culture. They are truly our fathers. Godzilla, King Kong, and Frankenstein. All connected somehow.
I think you got some holes in your narrative.
I'll live with that. Just like this movie lives with holes in its narrative.
So, what are we going to review next, Adam?
I don't know. I feel like we finished the season.
At some point, we talked about doing the Frankenstein Conquers the World stuff.
Yeah, it seems like we at least ought to tackle the other Toho monsters that came up around Godzilla and Kong. So we could do Rodan, Mothra, Baragon, Frankenstein, the Gargantuans. Maybe we could dig up some of the Toho sci-fi alien stuff, but at some point we should tackle all those together.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see what we both own or have access to.
That's true.
And it'll be a surprise next week. All right. Well, I think that about wraps up this episode. Hope everybody enjoyed it. Hope everybody could hear it.
King Kong, you know the name of King Kong. You know the fame of King Kong, 10 times as big as a man.